Welcome to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts. Today we have Dave Loverock, Vice President and Ice Maker Extraordinaire of Jet Ice, and Paul Golomski, Facility Director of the Pettit Center in West Allis, Wisconsin. Along with myself, Doug Peters, we have Don Zamboni. We will be discussing ice, water, and the process and complexities of making water into skating ice. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, guys.
Hello.
Dave, a while back in the industry, there was days when John Karsh and Roy Gardner would sit in a room and say that they had over 100 years of experience. In the room today, are we approaching 200 years between all four of us?
No, Doug, it just feels like that.
Yeah, it's something to get together with you, gentlemen. I want to thank you very much for participating in this. Hopefully our audience will get a lot of understanding about what it goes into making a sheet of ice. And I think that it's going to be interesting for them to find out what goes into specifically making a speed skating oval. Dave, can you provide just a brief bit of history with you and Jet Ice and your time in the industry?
It appears that I've been around in this industry for 40 some odd years. Just an ice maker. I started with Doug Moore, who was the chief engineer at Maple Leaf Gardens. And from that point going forward, I spent the last 40 years hanging around cold, dark, dank rinks. It's strange enough, I hung around Paul's rink when it was being built. It's quite a few years back, but and it's basically a job of an ice maker. That's really what I am. That's what I do.
Great, thank you. Paul, how did you get involved in the industry, and what's the genesis of your passion for ice quality and ice making at your facility?
Yeah, so I have been involved in ice making since 1998. I was very involved in hockey as a youth hockey player in the 80s and 90s, and was really infatuated with the facility I'm in now when I was a high school athlete. So working here was only natural for me, but I've been really kind of intrigued by the science specifically behind speed skating and making people go fast. So that's really the science behind ice and speed skating has really kept me interested over the last 22 years.
That's awesome, and it makes it an easy transition. Now I'd like to transfer over to Don to get to the icy core of our discussion. Don, please take it away.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of touch on some of the points that are involved in making quality ice. Ice that is dense is more thermally conductive, so there's a lot of benefits to having a good sheet of ice, and we just kind of wanted to talk some of the details of what it takes to make good ice. Just going down the list, we have air as a possible topic here, dissolved air in water. Paul, do you have any comments on air in water, or Dave?
You don't want to get me started, but yeah, there's a certain degree of interest in dissolved air in water. Really, when you make ice and well, there's a couple things that you really want to stay away from. You want to stay away from air in the ice, and you want to stay away from mineral content in the water, which will give you, if you remove both of those factors, you'll have a harder, denser sheet of ice. The air in ice that you really want to worry about is dissolved air. It's naturally occurring in most waters, and it is unseen. But you want to remove the mineral content, you want to remove the dissolved air when you're making ice. And it's really a process of heating the water, because heated water doesn't hold air. It's insoluble in hot water. I'm a big proponent of hot water flooding, and I think that anybody who drives a Zamboni has a good idea that it's a good direction to take for ice making.
Yeah, I agree with you. Hot water definitely has a history of making better ice. I find it a little challenging that heating the water removes the gases because, to be honest with you, I'm looking for the gases physically. If heated water was truly taking the gases out, I would expect the water coming out of a water heater to have air bubbles that we could see. And I'm a little bit perplexed on why we don't see that.
You actually don't see it because it's released. you can see it. You can actually quite see it simply in a pot. That's the where you'll see it the best. It does release air; it flashes off, and you see that when you put a pot on a stove. Although you don't, you've seen it 100 times probably. Set aside a pot on the stove and slowly turn the temperatures up to about 140 degrees, and you'll notice that the water has a tendency to look like there's a white foam in it, and that's what it is. It's the dissolved air coming out of solution. When you heat the water, it's already extracting itself, and you have in most places a system to fill your Zamboni, and by that time all of the air is out of the water. It's not, it just releases itself to air.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the reasons why hot water might help make good ice is its thermal effect on the frozen rink surface and its ability to melt into an impure surface from the last flood. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. Anybody goes out and takes their ice resurfacer out and does a flood knows right away that you'll get a better sheet of ice. You can see it. It's obvious. You'll get a better sheet of ice using 140-degree hot water for flooding. So I don't think that's even disputable.
But that we do have two reasons why hot water makes better ice. Then it removes air and it also burns into the rink surface, the frozen rink surface. Would we agree on that?
Definitely. I don't
Yeah, I
think
would
that's
agree with that, Don.
anybody who's ever done cold water flooding for any extended length of time, their ice usually starts to take on that occluded look, and it's the cloudiness of the air in itself that gets entrained in the ice phase. And there's a couple of things maybe we should talk about is um, hot water flooding, or maybe heading into the part about tempering your ice, which is one of the things that also releases air and releases mineral content. But dissolved air and water is also in combination with mineral content of the water.
But before we go into tempering, can we touch on RO water and why RO water is better?
Well, our water is it's a simple thing. Everybody says, oh, Jedi's. Treating water has been around for a couple of hundred years anyways. Some places do it with just a filtration system. RO water is a membrane system that actually you put a pressure on one side of the membrane and push good water through it, and all the mineral content goes in the other direction. So you start out with a high quality mineral free or almost mineral free water. And that in itself gives you the advantage of clarity of ice. And it's part of just about anybody who does anybody who makes ice, for everything from hockey ice right down to the people that make the swans for ice shows or ice cubes. Everybody's looking for that clarity, and the one way you get it is by removing the mineral content of water.
Paul, if I can jump in here, is there anything that you guys do at your facility with regards to treating your water that goes down on your ice surfaces?
Yeah, we're using deionized water, which is the product water is quite similar to what RO water would be. It's probably slightly cleaner, but we were one of the first facilities that I'm aware of in the early 90s to implement treated water for making ice, and that was primarily for speed skating purposes. And pure water is it's a great solvent, and it dissolves gases and solids so easily. But once you put solids into the water, especially for speed skating, if your solid content is too high, a lot of times that solid just migrates to the surface and is a frictional force for speed skating blades. So, I mean, the other aspect to friction with skate blades is you could also have an abrasive force with some solids. So, if the surface of an ice rink is covered with a lot of solid content, you could actually have an abrasive response to the skate blade and dulling it. But in terms of glide, the glide that is required in speed skating, there's no method to make speed skating ice with a high amount of solid content. It just doesn't work for us. And this is not really a subjective question because over the years of all the speed skating rinks in operation, I'm sure we've all had issues where you have a problem with your purification plant and you've got to run a competition with water with high solid content, and those competitions almost always go terribly wrong when you have to use water with high solids for high glide skating activity.
It definitely affects the quality of ice. I don't think it's ever disputed. You take the mineral content of the water, and that mineral content is gone. So you don't have what's called a spewing effect. During the freezing process, water has a tendency to reject mineral content. It's the last to freeze. Actually, the mineral content doesn't freeze, neither does the air. It's only the water that freezes. And so that mineral content has a tendency to rise or lift to the surface. It's a spew effect, actually. As the water freezes, it's trying to reject the magnesium, the calcium, the iron, the sodium, all the things that are in water that you drink. Not unusual. And they have a tendency to start to head to the surface, or to the load on the top. So as the water freezes, it's trying to reject all of that mineral content, and it ends up with a spew effect. I'm sure that many people have seen it in the industry where you put your ice in and you've got a greasy surface. What have you got a greasy surface for? Well, the greasy surface is the mineral content. It's not unusual for guys to go out and scrape the ice to get that off of it. It's speed skating is critical. These guys are trying to knock off 1/100th of a second of their time by going around a 400-meter track. Curling's a lot the same. You're trying to throw a 40-pound rock 150 feet, make it go out 4 feet and come back in 4 feet with the turn of a handle. You can't do that with a highly mineralized water.
The other aspect that I wanted to include into that is, with high mineral content, you're also going to have a freezing point depression. So, by adding solids to the water, the temperature of the water is naturally going to have a lower freezing point because of the solids are present. So, I mean, it's solids actually impede phase change of water and actually cause a depression in the freezing point itself.
I was wondering, Paul, if you could discuss the quantity of minerals in the water. I believe you have the ability to purify your water very cleanly, but there seems to be a process where we pollute the water a little bit or a little bit more for hockey ice, and I'm just wondering whether you could kind of tell us what you do with your water.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those hotly debated topics in the ice world now. I was one of those people that always believed that ice could only be made with ultra pure water, and for many years I was pretty stubborn about that. And I had a very well experienced ice maker that I've worked with in the past proved me wrong on that one. And the strange thing about solids in water is small additions of solid back to purified water, seem to have some mechanism where they improve the bond of ice and actually somehow improve the durability of the surface. So it kind of defeats logic when you think about what we're discussing, how important purified water is, and how it's not energy efficient and it causes cloudiness and all kinds of problems with your ice. We're spending all this money to purify water, and then we're taking that water and sending solid back into it. So it's a strange process, and it's, I think, debatable by all the ice techs out there right now. But I've found a little bit of back blend of solids back into the purified water is helpful in terms of durability and bond of layers together.
Paul, I have a tendency to agree with you on that. But there are a number of rinks out there, like we talk about water treatment. We're not the only water treatment business around, but a number of marinas do run straight RO or DI water. The adding of the mineral content is used in a couple of places. It, we did it in New York for years. New York has great water. Their water is probably down around 17, 20 parts per million, usually about a grain of hardness. And their water, when you freeze it, it has a tendency to what we refer to as crawl. And that crawling of the ice is simply because it's too cold. Well, when you're running 70,000 or 18,000 people in the building, you've got to compensate that load for air ice interface temperature. Now, everybody has different temperatures that they run their surface at. But what they did was they would pre-cool the building, they pre-cool the floor and the building. So what happens when you went out and put a flood down on the sheet, it would actually start to crawl or move. So what happens is with absolutely mineral-free water, it has a tendency to migrate or move during the phase change. The freezing process, the water doesn't want to go through that phase change. It will actually start to move away from the freezing process, leaving a orange peel-like effect on your ice surface. And that's when you know you've got pure water and it's too cold. So to compensate for that, it became an issue where we'd add bicarbonate of sodium bicarbonate, dissolve it in a bucket, pour it into the Zamboni fill tank, and then flood the sheet. That would stop the crawling and give you a nice smooth surface. And it's only probably 2 ounces in 165 gallons of water, but it would solve the issue of crawling on a nice cold ice surface. Adding mineral content to water has been around for a long time, especially people that have pure water. Vancouver's got great water. New York's got great water. Boston has great water. But when you get out to the prairies or someplace on the other side of Atlanta where Florida's got horrible water, mineral content affects the quality of the ice almost immediately.
Paul, could you maybe go into how your water is down there? It's got to be pretty decent. You got a lot of breweries in Wisconsin that make beer, and I can't imagine that they're using crappy water to make beer.
Yeah, well, we use Lake Michigan water, and it's very clean to start with. So we're generally measuring conductivity. So our conductivity of our city product water is about 330, and our deionization system can make water down to a conductivity of 15, and that's on demand 50 gallons a minute. And we found that to be too pure for most of our applications, and kind of see the things that Dave was describing about water crawling. For whatever reason, when water gets that clean in our application, it doesn't want to lay down flat. We get a little bit of the crawling even if it's heated. And so it's just a small addition of solids. And really what we're trying to do is knock down that ability of the water to crawl. And we want that surface tension to be really low, so it lays down in any skating ruts that haven't been cut out, instead of kind of standing up, which is what the crawling phenomenon looks like.
That sounds right, Paul.
I have one question, Paul, in regards to that. Have you noticed? I've heard from other makers of oval ice that, for example, they built their ice and they're normally flooding with really pure water, and then the day before the skate event, this same water that they've been laying on their rink is now not laying flat on the rink. And it was suspected that there was banners brought into the building, like advertising banners that had fresh paint on them. And the paint on these banners were off-gassing, and that off-gassing was somehow ending up on the rink, the frozen rink surface. Is there any credibility to that, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime that you have off-gassing of paints or solvents or anything that's in the air, what's going to happen is that creates a gas that's not oxygen or water. And, ice sheets act as natural dehumidifiers of gas. So it's going to draw that impure solvent right down to the ice surface. And any time that anything, any substance like inks or anything like that comes in contact with with the ice surface, it just wreaks havoc on it. So I think that you're referring to an issue that that happened about 6 years ago. We don't want to name any ovals specifically, but it did indeed happen, and I've seen similar things happen here in situations where we striped our running track with a solvent-based product, and that solvent got into the air, and it created a level of crawling on the ice surface that there was nothing that we could do. We could shave it over and over, and it wouldn't come out. And so it was a really strange thing to see. And I think you know what we did to get rid of that problem.
Don, that's an interesting question, and Paul, great feedback on that. It reminds me of 100 years ago when I was young, and my dad was the engineer for the North Stars, and he got called out to Philadelphia where they're having problems with their ice, and he watched their operation. And what they found was when they were cleaning the seating area in the lower bowl, they were using pressure washers, and that spray with the soap was getting up over the glass. Back then, they probably were using 3 and 5 foot, and Dave could probably verify that on glass height back in the days when there was only 12 teams in the league. But that's what they found was that was contaminating the ice. So I would think, Paul, in your building, with the size of the building, the volume of air, that it's probably a major challenge to try to keep dust and whatever that's floating in the air or that can get trapped in the air from settling on the ice surface and causing you problems.
Yeah, I mean, contamination in ice rinks, surface contamination is a huge problem. And it's a regular problem that I think, all ice makers are going to come in contact with. And it's really not just airborne contaminants. It can be, people walking on ice. It can be pieces of rubber flooring or airborne dust and dirt, fabric from hockey uniforms, even the studs and tires from a Zamboni are a common source of contamination to ice rinks that really can cause a lot of problems in terms of maintaining a high quality surface. If you're running high level hockey or speed skating or any high level competition for that matter, contamination is a big issue that you have to watch and be aware of. How are things getting out onto your ice sheet, and what are you doing to try to remedy those things?
Paul, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and Dave also, is the manipulation of TDS or conductivity, how we purify the water, and then what are the reasons why we pollute the water again? Is it only this crawling problem, or are there other issues also?
Well, you have to take into account there's a number of factors that affect your ice sheet. Ice thickness, water quality, air in the ice phase, the latent load, your air-ice interface temperature. And we found that if you use absolutely pure water, you have to raise your temperatures. And when you raise your temperatures, other issues come into play. But what happens is I find that by adding a small amount of mineral content to absolutely pure water, you don't get that shaling effect. There's because ice it thermally dries. You take a look at the outside edge of a skate mark on absolutely pure water, you'll notice there's little chips of ice off of it. It doesn't have that nice textured edge to it. And I think that by adding a small amount of mineral content, it helps. It helps with the surface.
Dave, I wanted to ask a question that you brought up the topic of crawl at Madison Square Gardens. And
Yep.
I'm just wondering, they've got the fast ice system that we have for our machines, which sprays the water down. Is that something that either is helped make that go away, or they're doing things differently because of the having fast ice, or does it reduce that crawl? Maybe if you could expand a little bit on your experience with the machines and their ice making capabilities before fast ice and post fast ice.
That's Jack and Paulie. They're both pretty good drivers, but the nice thing about the fast ice system is the fact that it gives you more consistency once it's set up and set up properly. Yeah, I know there's the guys out there, the old towel flood guys, been doing it this way for years, and they like it, and I'm not taking anything away from them. But I just like to say that the fast ice system gives you a more consistent pattern of levelness when you're using two machines on the ice surface. Never been any question about it. So you set up the machines. Their biggest problem was the fact that you'd have two guys doing two different things on two different machines when you're doing a resurface. This way, you set them up. They're both going to put down the same amount of water. They're both going to drive at the same speed, and it's called a controlled flood. And you can also add a little bit more water when you get a little bit deeper ruts. They put it in a couple of years back, and they love it.
Great, thank you. We've got some similar feedback on prior podcasts that we did with Cody Bateman of the Dallas Stars, and he talked a lot about how the quality of his, and he's had a fast ice system for the longest, I believe, of any NHL teams, and more experience than anybody that we know of. And he really said that by being able to dial in speed and water, how much water he's putting down really made a difference. And I'm really kind of curious if it does aid in the ability to control the crawl more, or if it really doesn't make any difference between a flood towel and flooding with a towel versus flooding with the fast ice system.
On the crawling aspect, I don't think it does, simply because the crawling aspect is related directly to floor temperature. But the other part too is the nice part about it is you can dial up and dial down, whereas nothing against towel flood guys, but you have more control over the amount of water you're putting down.
Great, thank you. Don, you got another question ready for the gentleman?
Yeah, when it comes to the manipulation of dissolved minerals in the floodwater, Paul, why don't you talk a little bit about that? I believe that you normally use more pure water for an oval versus your hockey ice. And do we know the reasons why a higher TDS water works better for hockey ice versus the pure water that you would normally lay on your oval?
Yeah, sure. I can touch on that. With speed skating, when you think about what they're doing, they're going 37, 38 miles an hour on a 400-meter oval, and the blades are so thin and they have no hollow edge. So they're gliding on the surface, and so they really need water to be pretty clean and not have a lot of solid content. But we need that ice to hold together. And when you look at a blade of a speed skate, after they skate by, if I can even put the tip of a fingernail into that skate rut, I know that something's wrong with our ice. I mean, that's how little they actually get into the ice surface. It's more sliding than gliding. They're sliding on the surface outside of just the starting position where they jump into the ice a little bit more. So we're really more concerned about level and temperature and the ability for them to glide rather than the durability side of things, where in hockey and short track and figure skating, you're really worried more about the durability of the ice, being able to withstand those really strong forces. And to give you an example of how confusing this can get, the sport of short track speed skating, which has really high impact. So in the corners in short track speed skating, they're just destroying the ice. And over they skate these laps. And originally, short track used to be run on really clean water, just like we run long track. And now the entire industry of short track has only run on municipal water. And it's not just because of the ability of water to crawl. It's that they believe that water, well, they don't believe, there's objective evidence to prove that it does. But they believe that there's a significant addition of durability to water with a higher solid content for short track speed skating. I'm not saying the same thing happens with hockey or figure skating, but it's been going on now for I don't know, 10 years in short track where they refuse to use purified water, and it kind of boggles the minds of all the ice guys that are convinced that purified water is the only way to go. And I'm not saying that I agree with that 100%, but I'm just making the statement that that's what's happening. And the mechanism of how or why these solids improve durability, or they think they improve durability, is hard for me to explain.
Possibly the fact that it's a softer interface by the fact that you've added mineral content to it. It's not just water frozen. The fact that you've now got a textured surface. When they go into those corners in short track, they just chew it up so badly. And for years, do you remember going out with big buckets of water and flooding it so you'd soften the interface up?
It's an interesting topic, Paul and Dave. I was visiting a rink not too far from you, Paul, and they were talking about how the water that they were using, and I don't know if they were drawing off city water, and I imagine it varies from municipality to municipality, but they talked about how sticky their ice was. And it's something I haven't heard in all the years I've been in the industry, but they took a couple buckets, one of purified water and one of just regular water, dumped it down, and were able to get the puck to glide differently on the pure water than they were on the regular tap water. And this was something that made a difference for their younger hockey players. So it's interesting, all the different things that you run into in trying to make different ice. And you've got two inner hockey rinks or figure skating rinks in addition to the oval. And I'm guessing it's a challenge to try to make the ice where everybody's comfortable and happy with the quality, because hockey players want colder ice, figure skaters want warmer ice, and speed skating ice is just completely different.
Yeah, I mean, we have the ability, we have a pretty advanced Rockwell automation system here where we can control all three sheets independently pretty precisely. The air temperature is what it is, you know, whatever the air is for the whole rink, it's a 155,000 square foot arena, so that's pretty constant. But you know, water quality for us is tricky because we have only one water source of our purified water, and whatever the blend is, it's going out to all three rinks. So a lot of times when the oval's not in, we're playing with blend of solids to appease short track speed skaters or hockey players a little more. And then, you know, once the oval's in, we're going a little bit pure on the cleanliness side with the purification, just to keep the speed skaters moving as fast as we possibly can. I mean, that's really our bread and butter here is speed skating. But the funny thing about what we were talking about earlier with the puck moving in sticky ice is, you know, the way that a puck moves or will move on purified water or city water is kind of independent on what's best for skates or you know, higher levels of play. You know, the puck might move faster on purified water and get better glide like a speed skate blade would, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the ice is going to have you know, better durability or dense qualities for the sport of hockey or figure skating.
Dave, have you done any testing or had, in your experience, had people comment about glide of puck? I know it's a big issue in the NHL where they talk about, will the puck ever lay flat for a shot to go?
It's a rubber puck. It's a rubber puck. It's supposed to bounce. Anyways, yeah, I often wonder about when you talk about glide. Glide's a rather peculiar phenomenon because and really, if you got to have a high mineral content and you've got a greasy surface, or if you have, if you're not aware of what your relative humidity is in the building, you'll get a skinning of frost or accumulation of. Sometimes you think your ice is a little bit greasy. It might not be mineral content. It might be condensate that's settling out on your surface. But in most cases, a purified water will give you great glide. It doesn't seem greasy because it is thermally dried. It is ice, and there's no mineral content in it. The puck should slide more rapidly, more freely. And as for the relative humidity, it's something that should be taken into account when you do something like start firing pucks around, because that surface is either it's sublimating or it's absorbing a frost.
Don, I don't know if you want to expand or have any more questions on that topic.
Yes, I'd like to. Most of our discussions appear to be related to the surface of the ice when we're talking about purified water. And I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper on what RO does to the structural integrity of the ice, improvements there, and whether we can talk about that, and also with Paul with his oval ice. You know, the ice is virtually perfectly clear, and I believe clear ice is a reflection of almost a pure crystal, and I'm just curious, not saying that a pure ice is ideal hockey ice, but I'm wondering what is the disadvantages of having solid ice? And this comes down to the way the hockey and figure skates actually penetrate the ice and actually cause the ice to fail. And I'm wondering whether RO is involved in how the ice fails when the skate is penetrating.
I think a lot of that has to do with your air ice interface temperature and the texture of the ice more than anything. And that's usually the texture of the ice isn't always reflective on mineral content or purity, whether it's DI or RO. It's reflective on the temperature of the slab itself. A lot of the figure skating events we do, we're running air ice interface temperatures 26, 27, 28. It gives them a softer texture. Figure skaters generally as a whole find that the softer interface allows them to go and do that jump without blowing out large chunks of ice. I really do believe that in a lot of cases, people for figure skating have their buildings far too cold. For years, it wasn't. It was a simple fact that at nighttime you'd have the shutdown. You bring your temperatures up. The figure skaters, the mums and tots, would come into your building. They'd skate around, and as the temperature started to climb to that 28, 29, and then you got hockey in the afternoon or in the evening, you start pulling your floor down that 3 or 4 or 5 degrees. It was based on energy savings, but it really was providing the figure skaters with a softer interface, which they seem to like for figure skating. We did the nationals years ago in Nashville, and in Nashville we ran a surface temperature scared me to death. We were at 30 degrees, and they just loved the ice. The only problem was it took longer to take up during the flooding process, and that was part of the issue that they had.
Okay, understood. Now that answer was very much related to temperature, but I kind of wanted to stick on the structure of the ice, and why does hockey ice and figure skating ice need to be different than oval ice? And I'm wondering whether ice that is too pure, let's say ice that is perfectly clear, will a penetrating hockey skate tend to penetrate deeper because the forces are able to penetrate deeper into the ice, and we have deeper fractures because the ice is so pure? I could be really wrong on this, but I'm wondering whether the impurities in floodwater create slight weaknesses between the flood layers that kind of buffer the lower levels of the ice from forces of the skate blade.
Yeah, Don, I should jump in and say that my ice on my oval is not perfectly clear all the time. It is perfectly clear for large events. If we have an international event or a national level event where there's a lot on the line, generally what we'll do is we'll shut down the track to the public or anybody else for a week, and we'll spend several days taking off the top 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch ice that is full of contamination and full of solids and dirt. You know, the upper levels of ice are often very heavily contaminated. So we find that there's a lot of benefit for speed skating specifically to really, you know, run our ice at a thickness where when we have big competitions, we can take that top 3/8 inch ice off, and then we have crystal clear ice that hasn't been skated in before. And that surface performs better than any, you know, daily or weekly surface that we put out there. But in terms of having hockey or figure skating on an ultra pure, ultra clean surface, you know, I kind of have to agree with Dave a little bit in the fact that ultra pure water at a real low temperature generally will break a little bit easier than ultra pure water will at a higher temperature. If you're running speed skating ice temperatures and a figure skater goes to jump into it, it's going to blow up. But if you're running more typical figure skating temperatures and that ice is still very clear and pure, I think it has a tendency to be a little bit more durable. So the temperature comes into the equation, but you're right. The question of how the solids present play into the durability factor and the forces into the ice. I mean, the forces that these athletes are putting into the ice is just tremendous. Thousands of pounds of force into a figure skating jump or a hockey turn, in one spot. And really, the ice, all ice is going to break to some extent. It's just a question of how badly and how deeply it breaks, to me.
Paul, one of the things that I'd like to ask from this is, and I've talked with a few other buildings around the country and around the world, I guess it would be, it being in Canada, where they temper their ice. And that's has something that, again, I'm not an ice maker. I just supply product to help you guys out. But I'm just wondering, how much tempering do you guys do either on your inner rinks or on your oval, and what kind of an impact does that have on the ice surface?
Yeah, I mean, it's a regular thing that we do here. I think we temper our inner rinks to a certain extent every night because we have scheduling capability of our ice temperatures overnight. Anytime there's not someone in the building, I'm driving temperatures up as high as I possibly can. So you have the energy savings benefit to that, but also, as Dave talked about earlier, when ice gets warm, it has the ability to kind of relax, and it has a tendency to float up solids and really release a lot of that, dissolved properties in the upper levels of the surface. So when you can let your surface warm up as high as you possibly can without floating paint, over a long period of time, let's say 6 or 8 hours, and then bring it down slowly, it has tremendous benefits in purifying the sheet, letting a lot of the stress that's in the ice sheet out, getting rid of some of the dissolved impurities and solids and gases and that kind of thing. But we've done it. We do it on a regular basis. On the oval, I'm a little bit less likely to do it because we typically run ice temperatures a bit thinner on a speed skating track than you would a hockey track. But I'll still push, I'll push 28 degrees overnight on all of our sheets. And with hockey, there's some guys that temper ice and they'll temper it until the surface is wet and then bring it back down. And, it can really help with clarity and that kind of thing.
Cleaning up the sheet's a wonderful thing by using the tempering method. I think the first time I ever saw it was back in probably the 70s, late 70s, early 80s at Maple Leaf Gardens, and the chief engineer there, Doug Moore, took out a large hose, shut the plant off, and put out about 2,000 gallons of water. Let it sit, watched his slab. Actually, he only had 2 sensors, feed and return, on his brine. And as that temperature climbed, he would get to a point where, okay, we got it tempered now, turn the plant back on and slowly pull it back down to that range. I think it was like 16, 18 feet of return. And then he would send out the ice resurfacers, and back then you could take the wash water tank and feed it back into the dump box. You could pick up another 75 or 80 gallons in that thing before you, and Sammy would go out and they'd pick up all the loose water and take that off the sheet. And surprisingly, you wouldn't believe how clean the sheet looked up after that. It's a wash tempering. Tempering for other people might mean something else. Calgary tempers their ice as well by allowing the temperatures to rise up to that 28, 29, 30 degrees and then slowly brings it back down. And everybody that does tempering really does believe that it brings texture into play more so than anything. And the benefit is also the clarity.
You both, thank you, Dave. You both have brought up some very good information about tempering. For those of us who, myself included, who maybe don't understand what that terminology means to temper, could you maybe expand a little bit and put it in basics so that some of the people that are listening who might not be as astute in the making of ice would better understand what it means, or what if tempering has multiple meanings like what you mentioned previously, Dave?
And tempering's been around as long as I've been in this industry. Some people did it for different reasons. But one of the things that we first noticed it at was uh, covering your floor. People would cover their floors for events in the larger venues. And so what would happen was you'd cover the floor up and you'd no longer have a load on your ice sheet. And what happened is the texture of the ice, once you get below that air ice interface temperature of 20, 22 degrees, you'd find that the ice starts to get shaly. And the shaleness of the ice comes from the fact that you're so cold that you change the texture of the ice. So when you tempering became the thing when you pulled out, I think they were using back then was Homosote. I remember Homosote horribly. And you would cover your floor with Homosote, you'd have your concert. But the problem was when you went to cover your floor, most times it was immediately following a hockey game where you had had the floor really cold because you were trying to freeze the water. And so you've got your brine or your glycol going out to your slab at 14, 16 or 12, 14. And kind of like you've put a couple scrapes on a flood, you've covered the floor with the Homosote. And now that floor is actually pulling down to that temperature. Okay, you've changed your brine temperatures up to whatever you want it when you covered your deck. So you want the temperatures up on the floor, probably 25, 26 degrees when it's covered. But the brine out on the floor is still at 16. Well, that would actually dehydrate the ice. It's probably the best term to use it. Um, and that would give you that horrible texture or shaly ice. So what you did was you pulled up your floor, did a couple scrapes, cleaned it up, and then put a couple of really big hot floods into it to temper your ice back up to give it that texture you want for hockey.
Great. Paul, I'm going to ask a question for you maybe that if you do any type of tempering, does it make the ice denser by getting rid of any impurities that may float towards the surface? And that'll lead me to the next question I have once you've answered.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, it should release some of those, impurities that we don't want into the ice to the surface. And I mean, I should point out that after you do any tempering like this, ice maintenance is important too, to go out there and do a heavy cut to try to get rid of all those things that are on the surface. So go out and dry shave the whole sheet, get rid of anything that may have been migrated up to the surface, and go from there.
Great. I want to get Don involved in here because I know that he's worked with you and a few others in regards to wash water and the wash water filtration. Don, can you maybe expand a little bit on what type of filtration that we're using currently and the things that you've worked with Paul at his facility?
Well, before we go off to wash water filtration, if you don't mind me going back to ask Paul real quick on the surface properties of your rink after tempering. Do you notice more debris on the surface after your pad comes down after a tempering process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as what Dave talked about before, the slimy kind of greasy surface that you get with solid accumulation on the surface is, if it's done properly, should be visible. And I mean, you can run your fingers over it and feel it and see it. So definitely, I mean, if you're doing it properly, you should get some float up there.
This kind of goes back to our discussions of Paul and Ari Pentala from Pro Rink in Finland. Ari has been a friend of ours. Paul and I have been talking to Ari, and yeah, one of the things that have come out of our conversations has been the filtration. Getting a lot of diverse feedback on what's being captured in these filters. Currently, the Zamboni Company is selling a 400 micron screen of wash water filter bag, and also a thicker 200 micron wash water filter bag that is catching the minerals that we talked about earlier. Can you share with us what you're doing on your oval?
Yeah, so we're on a daily basis on our hockey sheets and our oval, we're using 100 micron felt filters. And I don't know how much of a difference 200 to 100 will make, but that's a pretty big difference in size. So with 100 micron, we're capturing a very high amount of solids on our hockey rinks. And then, when we go into higher level speed skating competitions, once we have our ice closed down and we do a shave down to get, those upper level contaminants out of the ice surface, once we're satisfied with where the ice level is and the cleanliness of the ice and the surface, then we start using 25 micron filtration for the remainder of the competition. And the purpose of 25 micron for speed skating is to ensure that really no suspended solids get trapped in the ice or on the surface during any major competition. And we go as far as, a lot of people are going to think I'm crazy here, but with wash water, your conductivity or total dissolved solids is going to increase as you go throughout the day. So if you leave your wash water tank full of water, even if you're filtering it, the conductivity and the amount of solids that get past that filter are still there. So for speed skating, when we're using 25 micron filters, we're going as far as dumping the wash water every resurface, just to ensure that we're not throwing any level of dissolved solids down back onto the ice outside of what we want to have there. But it's also the 25 micron is also a really good measuring stick of how clean your ice is. If you're running a high level competition, your ice should be really clean, shouldn't have a lot of solid or entrapment in it. When we go down to that 25 micron and resurface for a day, I shouldn't really see much of anything coming into that filter. And that's really a gauge for me as how well we're doing with cleanliness and entrapment on the surface. We started talking about wash water filtration like 10 years ago. And I mean, the original discussion was based on the fact that I didn't think the wash water filtration was tight enough in the plastic baskets. Are those like 800 micron, or what is the original plastic basket, do you know?
Wow, yeah, that's a big micron. Yeah, I don't know the number, but it's very coarse.
It's probably 800 or 1,000 microns. So, we started discussing that about 10 years ago. If there's a way that we can, I didn't think we were capturing very much in the wash water stream, and so you had kind of come up with some ideas on what we could try, and so we tried these felt filter bags that are lower micron than what the basket was capturing. And pretty quickly we knew that we were onto something in the fact that I was getting just loads and loads of solid into these felt filter bags that I wasn't getting before in the plastic baskets. So that kind of evolved where we tested them for a few years and really saw an improvement. And when you think about the wash water operation, you're washing the surface and all that water is getting vacuumed up through this filtration system. And if you're not capturing the suspended solids or even larger dissolved solids into a filter, then it's really just going back to the ice. And so if you want to remove and truly wash your surface before putting down a new layer of ice, you really need to capture it in a tighter micron filter in that washing system.
Very good. One of the things I thought I would touch on is the diversity of pollutants that we're catching in these filters. What I've kind of found is with people with RO systems, these filters are, at least our 200 micron filter bag, tends to last well over a month. And the contamination within the bag tends to get dark-like, and I'm kind of suspicious that it's biological growth that's creating this dark color within the bag. But one of the things that I found really odd was the people that flood their rink with tap water. And it appears tap water, where these filters are clogging up with a whitish powder, which appears like, if you put 2 and 2 together, it appears like these 200 micron filters are capturing minerals that were once dissolved in the floodwater. So I'm kind of encouraged at that, but I'm not sure how that's going to affect the ice in the long term.
Donnie, I'd have to suggest that, yeah, the white powder you're getting off of it is mineral content. Used to see it in curling quite a bit, where people would go out and curl and slide up and down the ice, and on the surface of the ice they would pick up, they'd have white knees on all their pants, and that's just a calcium, magnesium, mineral hardness that is probably being picked up in the bag from the tap water.
Right, that's the way I'm taking this too, and I am hopefully, hopefully this is going to lead to better bonding between the flood water that we're laying down and what we're washing. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime you're removing suspended solids or even dissolved solids in high amounts, you're definitely going to have a better bond with your ice making water afterwards.
We'll kick it into another topic that both Dave and Paul can maybe touch on. If you guys could explain the basics of how water molecules freeze and how the impurities get pushed to the top of the surface. And Don, maybe you might have some questions in regards to that as well.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me. And I kind of want to bounce things off of Paul, because I thought our past discussions kind of led me to believe that Paul uses more pure water on his oval versus hockey ice. And I'm wondering whether the damage to the ice itself, the skate groove that is created by skates penetrating the ice, whether the mineral content in the water is aiding the repair of a skate groove. Ice that's completely flat, it's pretty easy to picture the ice freezing from the bottom up in an organized way. But when we're talking about ice freezing in a V-shaped groove, it's not so simple. Freezing water molecules, I believe, are very organized, and it's almost like building a block wall. And when we have interfaces at different angles, like let's say we got one side of the skate groove at one angle and one side of the skate groove on the other, what happens when those freezing interfaces interconnect? And does impurities in the water help repair these angle problems when they meet?
I wish I had the science background to tell you the truth on that one, Don, but that's a really hard question for me to answer.
Yeah, it's probably impossible to answer. Any speculation on your side?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years ago, I would have said no way. I would have said that I think that solids don't play a good role in ice making, but I think like we've talked about throughout this podcast, that those small amounts of solids, to me, they seem to have some. I'm not saying anybody should in a professional rink should go without purified water. I wouldn't suggest that, but what I'm suggesting is that somehow, some way, to me, there's some sort of bonding property that solids provide outside of just the crawling mechanism that reduces crawling. I don't know what it is, because I don't have the scientific background to be able to study and identify it. But that's purely based on speculation of what I see visually in my rink, and what I've seen going from ultra pure water, to using a little bit more of a blend. There seems to be better bonding and durability with a small amount of solid.
It appears like it's popular at the NHL level to actually have hot wash water in the machine, and I would take that as a way to purify the skate groove and make sure that we don't leave any snow in the skate groove. do you believe snow plays a role in skate grooves not being repaired correctly?
I really do believe that when you use the wash water and use wash water religiously, most of the snow and everything is taken out of the groove. What comes back is the flood that remains over top of it. And if you've got large ruts, they don't freeze. They just don't. You can be there for 20, 30, 40 minutes and that cut doesn't freeze. And it freezes from the bottom and the sides. And you'll see that when you do that, when you go back out to a rink that's you've tried to fix something up, unless you patch it with slush, it just doesn't seem to recover. And when it does recover, if you just leave water in a cut, you'll see that freezing from the outside, the last part to freeze is a cloudy, milky surface or section in the center of the cut.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Dave. I think that a lot of the cloudiness and contamination that you do see in ice is kind of a result of those big grooves that aren't getting fully cut out or fully freezing properly how they would, with a smaller footprint into the ice. So if you get a smaller groove, it's easier to cut out, easier to freeze. You get these giant corner ruts, that are probably happen in the NHL a lot. I don't really know how you can freeze those rapidly. There's really not a way to do it.
Only way to do is pack it in with slush and just give it. Some people use CO2. I've never been a big fan of it because it's so cold. But in most cases, you just pack them in, slush them down, and hope that it stays. You can take a look at most NHL buildings after the warm up. It's usually quite critical around the net area, and out there, guys sometimes putting on too much water to fill the cuts in, and I think sometimes that's part of the issue too.
But Dave, don't you think that wouldn't the slush fundamentally trap air in the groove?
Yep, hate to say it, but it does.
And freezing with a CO2 container would cause it to freeze from the top down, which kind of upsets our rejection process.
Yep, you're right. CO2 is CO2. What is it, minus 47 degrees? We've had a couple instances where we've had chunks blown out of the ice, like a piece that's 6 inches round. How do you patch that? You can't just start pouring water on it. It's not going to freeze fast enough. So you have to slush it down, pack it down, and CO2 it. You see guys come up with CO2 extinguisher, and CO2 is heavier than air. So what you really want to do is enclose that area like a box with no top or bottom of it. Slowly squeeze the CO2 into that box and let the CO2 hang in the air and freeze it down. It doesn't give you it gives you a patch, but that's all it does. And normally when you finish that patch using CO2, it's good to hit it with a splash of water to bring the temperature back up.
Right. Now, I've heard of people patching grooves like you just suggested, but I have heard people using a clear ice from a clear ice cube machine, right? So the ice chunks that are going into the skate groove are clear ice and not shaven ice from the surface, which we know is really impure. Maybe we can improve the repair to the groove if we put better ice in.
I can tell you a short story. I think Jack at Madison Square Gardens would relate to this one. The Rangers always had issues with their ice for a couple of years, but we had a bad crease one. A bad crease because it was rather thin, and the only way to fix it up was to flash freeze it. So they grabbed a bunch of ice cubes from the ice cube machine and laid it over the crease area. Well, actually, it was much bigger than that. And then sprayed water on them and let them freeze. Come back 6 hours later, and you could see there were the ice cubes with the holes in the center of them, and you could see them all over the entire area. Like they looked like little wee ice donuts in the sheet. Where the ice they put the pure ice cubes, it was all nice and clear, and then the cloudiness of the water that froze around them. It was a rather peculiar phenomenon. It was sort of a rude awakening for both of us.
That's very interesting. I would take that as the cloudiness is creating weakness. Would you agree?
I agree with that.
We have a graphic that we will post to the website so that you'll be able to link to it while you're listening to this podcast that talks about the freezing process. And Dave, Paul, if you guys could maybe expand a little bit about this wonderful graphic.
Really, the process of making ice is a constantly building the surface in specific layers and flash freezing. I'm a big proponent of using pure water. Sometimes you'll want to add a small mineral content. I'll agree with that, Paul, on that one. But what you want to do is flash freeze it. You want to continually freeze water, and you do it in thin layers. You'll get if it's absolutely pure water, you don't have to worry about mineral content that's in it because there is none. So it's just all you've got is hydrogen bonding, and you'll build up a nice thick piece of glass, but continually do it in layers, continually freeze it. Don't let the water go out there and lay there because you're actually melting back ice. I was guilty of it for years. I'd go out and do the 800,000 gallon flood and then go lie down for 4 or 5 hours waiting for it to take up. But if you continually build ice, you'll get a harder, denser, clearer sheet. And if you have minerals in your water, they become entrained in your ice sheet. They also start to salt out. So the actual mineral content starts to rise to the surface. You can see it. We do it we have it in curling clubs where you put on large floods and then you scrape to get the mineral content out of them.
I mean, the graphic that you have here is really showing how well organized water needs to be in order to freeze. Water needs a fair amount of organization in order to be a crystal clear sheet of ice, and solids don't play a big role in that organization. So water, Don and I had read a long time about Gerald Pollack's research. He's a bioengineer out of Washington State, and he's done a lot of research, basically proving that water forms an exclusion zone. And this is a prime graphic kind of showing how water needs to order itself, and water wants to be in a very ordered state. And the solids, especially in ice rink, when you're freezing from the bottom up, the solids are pretty naturally being rejected by the ordered state of the water. And we didn't talk about it earlier with hot water, but Gerald Pollack from Washington also really did a lot of research that showed that hot water has more energy and heat increases thermal motion of the water. So really the energy promotes freezing. We talked a lot about, how important hot water was, but, there's a lot of speculation now that it's not just dissolved gases, that it's also the rapid ordering of water because of the thermal motion of the water that heat possesses. But if every ice maker knew that water needs to be this ordered and rejects solids, I think the processes and the general understanding would be a lot better.
Great. Thank you, Paul and Dave, for your answers. Don, do you want to expand on this topic a bit?
Yeah, I'd like to make a statement about the illustration that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't believe the figure number 4 is really a true representation of what happens. With my experience, it doesn't seem like ice is able to restrict or reject impurities to that level of purity in figure 4. It seems like things kind of go awry near the end, and it almost seems like the water has a certain TDS that once we hit that conductivity or that impurity of flood water, that we start entrapping either gases or minerals. So I don't believe figure 4 is correct. Well, would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that water is purifying itself, but I would suggest that water does not like to have solids in it, especially when it's trying to freeze. So it's generally trying to organize and reject, but like you say in figure 4, it's probably not as dramatic as what's happening in 4, where you've got this ultra pure water and 7 layers of hydrogen and oxygen bonds and then this layer of solid. I don't think it's quite that pronounced. But I definitely agree that the drawings are a good illustration of what's potentially happening there.
Yeah, I was a little bit uncomfortable using this illustration because I think number 4 is a little bit fundamentally wrong, but I thought I would bring it into this discussion just because it helps us discuss the topic of rejection towards the surface.
Well, I think that, Don, I think you're right on. If you look at, we're talking about a sheet of ice here, but if you take a look at the when you're making ice cubes in your home, it has the same sort of effect where you freeze the outside perimeter, you lock everything in the inside. It's only the water that freezes. It's not the little air bubbles or the dissolved air in water, and it's not the mineral content. They don't want to freeze, so they move to the center or the heat, and that's where they collect. And right at the final freezing is that center of the ice cube, and that's when you look at it. That's where all the mineral content is, and the outside perimeter is all nice and clear. There's some validity to all of your drawings there.
Gentlemen, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience today in regards to ice making secrets that you're willing to let out? Any interesting products that are out there that swirl water the proper way to make it more energy efficient and create better ice?
Doug, I won't be baited by you, but I really do. When you talk about quality ice, I still say a lot of it has to do with knowledge and communication and the driver. Uh, a good driver is worth a small fortune. I know drivers are all going, "Oh, geez, that's me. I should get a pay raise." But in most cases, it's the driver that makes the decision on what he does when he goes out to that sheet. And he's got to make a call whether he's going to take off a full bucket, a half a bucket. He's just going to pick up some snow and use a wash water with a half an inch coming up, quarter inch coming off the spreader pipe. But a good driver knows his ice sheet. He's able to read it and he knows what he's doing when he steps on the ice. Bad drivers go out there and they'll take off a full bucket and dump a full load when it's not even necessary. And I think that a lot of the things we talk about when we talk about quality ice is the fact that some of the people aren't trained properly. So it's more of an education process. And as I said, it's important to understand that the drivers play a big part in your quality of ice.
Great. And Paul, how about you? Is there any secret that you're willing to share, some special sauce that our listeners might want to know what you do to make your ice the best that it can be?
I am a big proponent of Dave's Jet Gloss chemical that they sell as a. Dave might be able to elaborate on that a little bit. I do like the Jet Gloss chemical for ice. I think that's a great way to produce a quality sheet. But I mean, in general, it's all about the details in ice making. All the small things matter, and if you ignore the small things or just have a good enough mentality, then you're never going to have a successful building. It just has to be, a commitment to quality and a commitment to understanding what you're doing, I think yields the best results. And really every building is different, right? What might work for me might not work for another guy with different facility automation or different water quality or different purification plants. So it's really optimizing what's best for your facility and user groups.
Dave, do you want to touch on the Jet Gloss product, which is a oxygen scavenger? Maybe let people know a little bit about that and
not really
what it does. No.
Oh, you know what? This started like probably 35 years ago. We talked about this goes back to Doug Moore and Gil Adamson, and it's about the surface tension of water. And what you want to do is you want to remove the surface temperature of water and allow dissolved air or air bubbles that are entrained in your ice sheet rise to the surface and break. It's all it is a surfactant. It's a surface acting agent. It's used in small doses on the last flood of the night, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. And you go out and you fill your machine up to one heavy flood. And what it does is allow the air to come to the surface, the bubbles to break, any air that's entrained in your ice sheet, and gives you a cleaner, clearer sheet of ice. And people who use it properly. People who use it religiously.
Right. Well, I'm not going to let you completely off the hook. I possibly for a future podcast we can try to see by bringing in an angry ice guy by the name of Mr. Peduto to see if we can't get your head to spin a little bit by talking about the plastic wands that are out there and available.
I just, it's really, all it is the wands and the guys that talk about these units, it's just bad science.
Paul, I want to ask you a question. We had a one-of-a-kind machine at the original Oval in West Dallas. It was a Model L. Just wondering if you have had any experience with that or ever got to see it in operation.
I didn't have the pleasure of seeing it in operation. I've shown pictures to all the speed skating volunteers and officials here, and they all have pretty fond memories of it. And to explain how that worked is, in speed skating years ago, they used to use snow as lane markers outside instead of a continuous 2-inch line like we use now. And so this machine could actually make a snow line to mark a lane in the ice. But it would throw the snow to the inside of the track is what I understood. And I did see that at R&R in Somerset, Wisconsin a few years ago in the Zamboni graveyard they have there. We're really excited about the idea that you're restoring it, and can't wait to see what it looks like being a one-of-a-kind machine.
Well, we'd love someday, if it could, once it gets restored, to get down and find a home at your facility on display, because it would be a good location for it, with people getting an opportunity to relive the past as to what it was used for, and maybe some more history for the facility that you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great.
Great. As I'm a foodie, I'm going to ask, I guess it's now my trademark questions. I believe that I've found, it's top 2 for me. There's a place down in Florida called Tom Jenkins, but Saz's Barbecue is one of my favorites. When I visit the Milwaukee area, I will try very hard to visit there. Are you a fan of Saz's Barbecue, Paul?
It's great. Yeah, love barbecue. Saz's is like a Milwaukee tradition here, so you're not going to find many people in Milwaukee that don't like Saz's.
Okay. Is there some place that's going to be comparable that maybe you put a little bit higher up the list than Saz's?
Yeah, I eat Mexican food like 4 or 5 times a week, so there's lots of great Mexican restaurants in Milwaukee that I'd love to take you to if you're in town.
Awesome. I am a big fan of Mexican food. We've got a lot of it out here in Southern California. That's great. So I look forward to the next time I can visit with you up there and we can go out to one of your favorite Mexican joints. Okay, Dave, in your travels, you travel quite a bit. Is there a place in and around the Milwaukee area or Wisconsin in general that sticks in your mind as a have-to-go-to place when you're out and about?
The Pettit National Ice Center. For food? Oh, no,
Yeah.
not really. Not really.
No.
I don't get it.
All right. Well,
anything to do with cheese is okay with me.
there you go. There you go. Dave, I've got a question for you as well. You've traveled all over the world talking about ice, preaching about quality of ice and impacts. Have you visited all the continents as yet?
No, not yet. Still working on a couple left.
Paul, one last question for you. One of my high school classmates is a skater at your facility. Her name's Susie Osum. How accomplished is she? And is our equipment helping her be all that she can be as a speed skater?
Susie, I can't say that I remember her when she was competing in her younger days, but Susie has been skating here for a long time. She's a very accomplished master skater. She's probably here twice a week with her husband right now, and is a real ambassador for the sport. So I can't really speak to her speed skating career and what her accomplishments were, but she's been here and spent a lot of time, and great person to be around.
Are you implying that both she and I are old by calling her a master skater?
I guess so. I think master skaters now are anybody over like 35. So yeah, we fall into that category pretty easily.
If you do see her, tell her I said hello and tell her that I hope that the Zamboni product is helping her do everything she wants to do in the speed skating world. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, Dave, Paul, and
No
Don
problems.
for your help. Thanks, gentlemen, and have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Dave.
We want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts podcast. Have a question for one of our experts or an idea for a future episode? Please email your questions or requests to info@zamboni.com. For more info and additional podcast episodes, please visit zamboni.com/podcast or search Ask the Zamboni Experts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. This is Doug Peters wishing you an ice day.